And so that trade agreement reached between the U.S. and the European Union stays off a potential trade war between the two allies, at least for now. The deal sets a 15% tariff on most European goods, including cars. The EU has also agreed to purchase $750 billion worth of American energy and invest $600 billion into the United States. Now, some products will not be subject to tariffs, including aircrafts and their components, certain chemicals, and some pharmaceuticals. President Trump says the 50% tariff on steel will remain unchanged. Now, this 15% tariff is lower than the 30% rate Trump had previously threatened, but higher than the 10% that the EU had been hoping for. European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen spoke to reporters yesterday about the deal and the negotiations with President Trump.
It was very difficult because we started far apart from each other. It was tough, fair, but it was tough. And therefore, rightly so, you saw the tension at the beginning. So we had to work hard to come to a common position. And till the very end, as always in negotiations, you don't know whether you'll find the landing point, the landing zone at the very end, or whether it crashes. So it was tough, but in the end, as we were successful, it's good and it's satisfactory.
Let's bring in now President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. He's the author of the weekly newsletter, Home and Away, available on Substack. Also joining us, U.S. National Editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce, and staff writer for The Atlantic, Frank Foer. Thank you all for being with us this morning. Richard Haass, let's start with you. Much has been made about how President Trump has put a strain on traditional alliances, the EU, chief among them. He has used some really vitriolic rhetoric to describe them over the months. But now a deal is struck, maybe not perfect, but done, and puts, at least for the time being, fears of a trade war to the side. What do you make of what you heard from the EU commissioner and the President of the United States?
Well, I think this is a deal. It's less for what it accomplished, Jonathan, than what it avoided. The Europeans did not want to have an escalating tariff war. People wanted predictability. But also for the Europeans, as important as the trade dimension is of the relationship, there's other dimensions, beginning with the security and obviously with the war against Russia in Ukraine. So it was very much in the European interest to somehow, some way, find a way to resolve the trade frictions. I expect there'll be some in Europe who'll say perhaps they ought to have pushed back harder, they gave up too much. But I think this was something of a bargain or a decision from their point of view to reflect their greater priorities. I think one of the only other question I'll be interested in what Ed has to say about this is the long-term consequences of this, that even if a crisis was avoided right now, whether this sets in motion trends or pressures that essentially move the Europeans away from the United States, because it sends signals that we're prepared to see this relationship deteriorate unless we get our way on tariffs and trade.
Well, Ed Luce, let's do exactly that. What do you make of Richard's question there about the short and long-term trends out of this deal?
It's exactly the right question from Richard. I mean, look, this is better than it could have been. There was a 30% tariff threatened on August the 1st if a deal wasn't reached, but it is worse than what Britain achieved, which was a 10%, not a 15% tariff. So the European disaffection with this, whilst many share the relief that Ursula von der Leyen you showed expressing there, they also, from France and Germany in particular, expressed real frustration that there's going to be quite a big hit here to European GDP. And we've got Europe already in the last 6 months negotiating to have a partnership agreement with the Indo-Pacific trade area, the CPTPP, as it's called. They're reaching out to to Latin America. They're looking at Southeast Asia. They're looking at Africa. They're looking to do real deals, real trade reduction, barrier reduction deals all over the world, which will increase trade between them and reduce trade with the United States. So I think the long-term effect that Richard was implying is there's going to be more free trade everywhere but with the United States. And that's going to divert growth from the US ultimately.
So, John Heilemann, we know there are few ideological constants when it comes to Donald Trump, but one of them is his belief in tariffs. And he is imposing some here, but strikes a deal that avoids, at least for now, a larger trade war. But the other one is still, there was a handful of friendly words we heard from him over the weekend, but still largely some sort of distrust and even at times distaste for Europe.
Yeah, that's right, Jonathan. I think there are a couple of larger questions. I mean, one of the two that Ed and Richard talked about, one of which is as you get a rebalancing of global trade and the alliances that kind of flow out of the economic arrangements between these, not just these countries, but these trade blocs. The other question is, what happens to prices? I mean, we have heard for a long time that what will happen if we impose tariffs that are higher than existing levels, that we're going to start to see prices rise on the products. So from the narrow domestic political context for American consumers, are all of these products that we paid lower prices for in the past, or are we going to be paying higher prices for them now? And do American consumers notice Trump not only loves the art of the deal, but he loves to be able to declare victory. I made a deal. Right. What does the deal accomplish? What does the deal do for us? Does it actually accomplish anything that's good for American consumers? What are the long-term implications for the alliances and global trade? Those questions are down the road. Donald Trump wants to take the short-term win. In this case, for him, averting catastrophe, but being able to announce a deal is kind of enough.
Those questions might be down the road, Frank, but the road is getting shorter. We've yet to see the true tangible impact of tariffs in some of these economic reports that we look at. But analysts do say it's coming. And what they see in a deal like the EU one, for example, is that it's not enough to completely disrupt global trade, but it is enough to pass on higher prices to consumers. That was a central political issue for Trump in 2024. And this is a guy who loves to say promises made, promises kept. On this, it doesn't necessarily sound like he's going to be able to, right?
Right. Well, for now, companies have swallowed so much of the cost. They haven't passed them on fully to consumers. But every law of business and economics suggests that over the long run, that's not something that they'll be able to sustain. So there is going to be a point at which prices are going to start to tick upwards. We don't know exactly the magnitude of that, of course, but this does undercut the fundamental promise of the Trump administration, and he's gonna get slammed with that eventually.